This video has two parts. The first is a case study of an argument about meritocracy that I hear from a lot of left-wing people. And to help me make my point in this part, I borrow a lot of ideas from Michael Sandel's book, The Tyranny of Merit, which you can see the cover here, not the actual book, because I got it from the library. The second part of the video explains the logic of my critique going to broader society. And then I conclude with an alternate way of thinking about the world. So I just want to jump right in. During the Great Depression, the author James Truslow Adams wrote a book titled The Epic of America, in which he coined the phrase, the American Dream. I'm sure you've all heard it. Here's Truslow's version.
It is a dream of a social order in which each man and each woman shall be able to attain the fullest stature of which they are innately capable, and be recognized by others for what they are, regardless of the fortuitous circumstances of birth or position.
In short, the American dream is a dream of meritocracy. With hard work and talent, anyone can rise to the top. Under feudalism or a caste system, your status in society was unchangeable. If you were born a serf, you'd stay a serf. If you were born a noble, you'd always be a noble. Your status was up to factors out of your control. In other societies, it was based on different factors outside of your control. Your race, or your gender, or your place of origin. Those were all the determining factors of how far you could go. As history moved on, we all, mostly, agreed that it was wrong to limit people based on the things that they couldn't control. Truslow believed that this idea was the US's gift to mankind. This attitude continues a century later. Here's President Obama.
This is a country where no matter what you look like or where you come from, if you're willing to study and work hard, you can go as far as your talents will take you. You can make it if you try. I am only the President of the United States today because of the chance my education gave me. And I want every child in America to have that same chance. That's what I'm fighting for. And as long as I have the privilege of being your president, that's what I'm going to keep fighting for. Thanks.
Notice that the president is contradicting himself. He claims, this is a country where you can go as far as your talents will take you, and you can make it if you try. It's a bad impression. In the next moment, he says he's going to fight to make sure every child has the same opportunities that he had. So apparently we live in a meritocracy, but we also need to fight for equality of opportunity. But maybe Obama believes, like many people, that the US is a place of meritocracy where you can make it if you try, even if it's not perfect. Here is where our left-winger comes in. Fact check, they say. The US is not a meritocracy. Contrary to our ideals, the wealth status of parents does tend to get passed on to their children. We have data to back this up. In this graph, the dark purple is the US and the light gray is Denmark. It says that American men raised in the bottom 20% of wealth tend to stay in that bottom 20%, while those raised in the top 20% are likely to stay in the top 20%. And while the Danish have the same overall trend, it is much easier for a Danish person to leave the bottom 20%. This is true compared to other wealthy countries as well. In the US, 65% of people born into that bottom rung of our 5-rung ladder here, they tend to stay on those bottom 2 rungs. It's not really a radical critique. Honestly, it would be kind of racist to think otherwise. If you believe that anyone can make it if they try and anyone can rise as high as their talents can take them, then why do white families have a median wealth 10 times higher than black families? Or what does it mean that the median income of Hispanic and Latino people in the US is half of that of white families? We can also say it's sexist too, unless you want to claim that women and black and Hispanic people are somehow less hardworking or less talented than white men. Then you're probably going to have to accept that we don't live in a meritocracy. I'm sure that there are people who actually do believe that white men are more hardworking, but I think most people wouldn't be comfortable with saying that because it's obviously racist and sexist. And let's really drive this point home. Consider an unsurprising fact. 6.5% of MIT students come from the bottom rung of our income ladder. That's that bottom 20%. While the majority, the 61% of those students, come from that top rung of our ladder. At Harvard, less than 5% of their students come from that bottom rung, while 15% come from not the top rung, but the top 1%. Okay, that's right, there's 3 times as many students from the top 1% at Harvard than there are from the entire bottom 20%. This data is from 2013, so it may not be true of MIT students and Harvard students today, 10 years later, although the students that are in that data are now in their 30s, which does mean that they are politicians and are business leaders, or at least will be in the next decade. Anyway, we know why this disparity exists. Back in 2019, rich parents were caught in a college admissions scandal, and nobody was really surprised. Maybe they were surprised by the extreme lengths that parents would go, but no one's really shocked that the rich cheat. The schools already hold students for the children of large donors and alumni, the so-called legacy students. Why not a little cheating on the SAT while you're at it? Here's a quote from Michael Sandel.
As public debate has raged about affirmative action for racial and ethnic minorities, colleges have quietly practiced what amounts to affirmative action for the wealthy. For example, many selective colleges and universities give preference to the children of alumni on the grounds that admitting them builds community spirit and generates gifts to the endowment. Overall, Harvard admits only 1 applicant of 20. Of legacy applicants, it accepts 1 out of 3.
But a degree from an elite university is very meaningful for attaining power and privilege in our society. Consider this, 2/3 of USians don't have a college degree, but 96% of Congress does. So of course, our left-winger says the US is not a meritocracy. The American dream is a lie. As Malcolm X says, we don't see the American dream. We, meaning he was meaning black people, have experienced only the American nightmare. All of this is true. The US is provably not a meritocracy. There is more social mobility in China than in the US. However, my critique is that we can't really stop our analysis there. We need to interrogate the idea of meritocracy a little more. Consider a story Michael Sandel gives in his book. Henry Aaron, better known as Hammer and Hank, was a black child growing up in the segregated US South. He and his family faced the racism and humiliation that was common for black people in the South at the time. Aaron was inspired, though, by Jackie Robinson, the first black man to compete in Major League Baseball. With what little he had, Aaron worked hard to bring himself to the top of the game, and one day he broke Babe Ruth's home run record. Sandel quotes the biographer Howard Bryant. Hitting, it could be argued, represented the first meritocracy in Henry's life. What an inspiring story. Finally, instead of being judged by the color of his skin, Hank Aaron was given credit for his skills and talents. Isn't that the dream? Hank Aaron's story seems to juxtapose a bad system with a good one, a socially unmobile racial caste system versus a socially mobile meritocracy, one where the circumstances out of his control determined his status versus one where his skills and talents allowed him to rise to the top. But maybe we're missing something here. Racism and segregation are systems of inequality where people are treated as an underclass and other people have an unjust authority over them. The sad thing about Aaron's story was that he had to become the greatest home run hitter in baseball in order to earn that basic dignity and respect. But he shouldn't have had to fight for those things in the first place. The sad part wasn't simply that Aaron's only escape from poverty and racism was baseball, but that he had to endure poverty and racism at all. Here's a quote from Sandel.
Inspired by the heroic rise of a few, we ask how others might also be enabled to escape the conditions that weigh them down. Rather than repair the conditions that people want to flee, we construct a politics that makes mobility the answer to inequality. Breaking down barriers is a good thing. No one should be held back by poverty or prejudice, but a good society cannot be premised only on the promise of escape.
The critique I'm making is somewhat subtle. The issue is not that admission into the elite isn't meritocratic. The issue is that there are elites at all. Left-wingers who critique the American dream shouldn't miss this. In my view, the main thing that separates the right and the left is their view of hierarchy. Throughout history, the left has been about flattening hierarchies, while the right has been about imposing and justifying them. Opposition to unjust hierarchy is what motivates the left, or at least it should. Our belief that people shouldn't have authority or privilege over others, or if they absolutely have to, that authority must be constantly checked and limited by democratic processes. While the right may have problems with who is at the top of the hierarchy, they still believe that there should be a hierarchy.
I was a good student. I always hear about the elite. The elite, they're elite. I went to better schools than they did. I was a better student than they were. I live in a bigger, more beautiful apartment, and I live in the White House too, which is really great. I think we're the elites. They're not the elites.
The view on hierarchy is why the right is in favor of traditional families and bureaucratic religions, and the left supports free love and separation of church and state. The right supports hierarchies of wealth in healthcare, education, and politics, while the left hopes to eliminate that inequality through publicly funded programs. Historically, the right was in favor of monarchy, white supremacy, imperialism, while the left promoted democracy, integration, and internationalism. I'm not saying this just to demonize the right, but as a reflection of the historical tradition that goes back to the concept of left versus right that originated in the French Revolution. Left wing or right wing doesn't really describe the whole range of political positions that you can have, but it is one helpful way of grouping general trends. If this is a new concept to you, I'll link a video in the description that does a better job of explaining than I will. Let's think again about those elite colleges. It's not surprising that people want to get into these elite colleges, meritocracy or not. An elite university degree is basically a guaranteed launchpad to the top of society. But why is that? What has this elitism meant for the students of those universities? Not really a better education. Most of those universities started offering their courses online for free, with lectures posted on YouTube and class material downloadable through their website. Here's Sandel.
Drawing high-scoring students from a broader range of colleges across the country into a smaller circle of hyper-selective places has deepened inequality, but done little, if anything, to improve education. The anxious strive and hoop jumping that meritocratic sorting has induced has rendered students less open to the exploratory character of a liberal arts education.
We already knew this. Any college advisor can tell you that these colleges are prestigious and desirable because of their elitism. Attending an elite university opens doors for graduates that are unavailable to the rest of us. Not because these graduates are smarter or more able, but simply because they can write Harvard on their resume. But elite universities are just an example. The left-wing critique of the American dream, you can make it if you try, should not end with, that's just not true. It's not enough to point out that American meritocracy is a myth, that equality of opportunity isn't realized, and that social mobility is absent. We should go further and recognize that the premise of meritocracy was a bad idea in the first place. We should demand that elite universities accept students from all rungs of society, but we should also demand an end to elitism. We should demand that there should be an escape from situations of racial injustice, but we should also demand an end to racial injustice. We should demand the opportunity to leave poverty, but we should also demand an end to poverty. We should demand chances to earn respect and dignity, but we should also demand respect and dignity for everyone in the first place. In 1957, Michael Young wrote a book where he describes a dystopian future with a caste system where schools were segregated by IQ. The upper class in Young's story is arrogant, uncaring, and never criticized. The lower class is ignored, humiliated, demoralized, reduced to domestic servants, and as their previous jobs became automated. Democracy was dismantled and replaced by a selection process. To describe this system, Young coined a new word. He called his dystopia meritocracy. Social mobility isn't the answer to social inequality. Equality is the answer. Let me be clear. Meritocracy might be a good temporary fix to injustice, but if we want to end injustice, we want to end the inequalities that led to that injustice in the first place. If you are in serious pain, painkillers might be a good temporary remedy, but it would be better to solve the source of the pain. When we want to solve problems brought out by unequal situations, equality is the cure. but equality is not really a well-defined idea. There are some contexts where equality might be a very bad thing. So my goal in this part is to explain the problems with inequality so that we can understand what form of equality will address our situation. Let me introduce you to Thomas. Thomas is wise. Thomas knows that meritocracy can never overcome fate and truly make individuals masters of their destiny. But Thomas doesn't think like those uneducated plebeians. Thomas likes meritocracy because it puts the correct people in charge. Let's put the best people at the top, Thomas says, pragmatically. So, what if meritocracy is the unequal? Don't we want the educated and talented and skilled to run our society? In Thomas's view, people are not created equal, and our society should reflect that. Thomas's last name is Jefferson. He once said,
"We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created Hold on, this is not right. That's not the right quote. Oh, here it is. "There is a natural aristocracy among men. The grounds of this are virtue and talents. The natural aristocracy I consider as the most precious gift of nature for the instruction, the trust, and government of society. And indeed, it would have been inconsistent in creation to have formed man for the social state and not to have provided virtue and wisdom enough to manage the concerns of the society. May we not even say that that form of government is the best, which provides the most effectual for a pure selection of these natural aristoi into the offices of government?"
It shouldn't surprise you that I disagree with Thomas. Not because I'm a leftist and so I must pledge undying allegiance to equality. Inequality, no matter the justification, has some predictable consequences. Sandel, throughout his book, discusses what he calls meritocratic hubris. The idea is that many people have difficulty accepting the role that luck plays in their life, especially those people at the top. We can explain over and over that not everyone who works hard rises to the top. We can talk endlessly about how it's not what you know, but who you know. But ultimately, many people think that doesn't apply to them. Here's Sandel.
Meritocratic hubris reflects the tendency of winners to inhale too deeply of their success, to forget the luck and good fortune that helped them on their way. It is the smug conviction of those who land on top that they deserve their fate, and that those on the bottom deserve theirs too.
And we set up a society where those smug winners have the power and wealth to make decisions for all of society. I wonder how they're going to treat those people at the bottom. I'm sure it's going to be super ethically with respect and consideration of our common dignity. If the people at the top act like they earned their position even in the current society where it's obviously untrue, is it somehow going to be better in a society where we tell people at the top that they are the most virtuous and intelligent? Power corrupts, and even the most virtuous can succumb to evil in the wrong circumstances. Let's spend a little bit more time thinking about the fate of the winners. In the first part, I discussed how the wealthy improved their children's odds of getting into college. We focused on the admissions scandal of 2019 and legacy admissions. Wealthy parents who don't cheat instead make their children's grade school life a mental health disaster. Here's Sandel.
Prosperous parents are able to give their kids a powerful boost in the bid for admission from elite colleges, but often at the cost of transforming their high school years into a high-stress, anxiety-ridden, sleep-deprived gauntlet of advanced placement courses, test prep tutoring, sports training, dance and music lessons, and a myriad of extracurricular and public service activities, often under the advice and tutelage of private admissions consultants whose fees can cost more than 4 years at Yale.
But if this was about ensuring their children live comfortably, there are other cheaper methods. They could just give their children money. The consultant at the heart of the admission scandal made $25 million, and that's profit after he bribed coaches and test proctors, so there was even more money exchanged. Wealthy parents in the admission scandal and donor parents who buy their children's seats spend hundreds of thousands of dollars. Legal college consulting isn't cheap either. And this is all before parents have to pay for tuition at the most expensive universities in the US. Anecdotally, I work at a high school with a diversity of income levels. It's clear to me that anxiety, depression, and stress about school and grades is very high among students with high incomes, and students at lower incomes have more stress related to personal and home life. High school should be a time where students can explore who they are and who they want to be. They should have time to learn life skills and imagine greater things. Instead, their lunches are cut to 15 minutes long, and free time is taken up with tutoring, sports, and homework. Students will email me during summer break to ask how they can prepare for class. Parents do their children's homework if the student doesn't have free time. The goal of educating students and promoting healthy growth takes a backseat to ensuring students look superior to their peers for colleges and post-graduation careers. Why would people do this to their kids? Why do the kids go along with it? One clue comes from research that compares parenting styles across countries. This graph compares the percent of parents who emphasize hard work with income inequality in that country. It appears that the higher income inequality, the more parents emphasize hard work. Let's compare that to this chart. This graph compares the percentage of parents who emphasize imagination to their children versus income inequality. The opposite trend appears here. The more income inequality, the less likely imagination is emphasized. These graphs and other research indicate that inequality potentially influences parenting styles. Correlation is not causation, so let's get philosophical about this connection. The more unequal a society, the higher the risk of failure. If winning has drastically different effects from losing, then it makes sense to be hyper-focused on winning. If there's a large gap between the rich and poor, then students who don't succeed will be much worse off than ever before. In more equal societies, not succeeding means you have it a little harder, and succeeding means your life will be a little easier. In unequal society like the US, not succeeding means struggling to survive, while succeeding means you control unimaginable wealth and power. The intense competition makes students' high school lives, their childhoods in general, a nightmare of stress and anxiety about making every moment productive. No wonder Devin Price had to write a book called Laziness Does Not Exist to remind us that it's okay to be lazy sometimes.
So often we overlook the worth and the significance of those who are not in professional jobs, of those who are not in the so-called big jobs. But let me say to you tonight that whenever you are engaged in work that serves humanity and is for the building of humanity, it has dignity and it has worth. One day our society must come to see this. One day our society will come to respect the sanitation worker if it is to survive, for the person who picks up our garbage as in the final analysis is as significant as the physician, for if he doesn't do his job, disease is rampant. All labor has dignity.
We should now turn our attention to everyone else. We should be concerned about inequality because it drives a wedge between the winners and losers. Like Sandel says, the winner's hubris not only leads them to believe they're superior, but also that the losers are inferior. A glance at the research about what's called educationism or credentialism reveals that this attitude isn't really just theoretical. Those with higher educational attainment have been found to hold prejudiced opinions about those with fewer educational credentials.
Could you quickly, I think I probably have a much higher IQ than you do, I suspect. I went to law school on a full academic scholarship, the only one in my class to have a full academic scholarship. In the first year in law school, I decided I didn't want to be in law school and ended up in the bottom two-thirds of my class, and then decided I wanted to stay, went back to law school, and in fact ended up in the top half of my class. I won the international moot court competition. I was the outstanding student in the political science department at the end of my year. I graduated with 3 degrees from undergraduate school and 165 credits, only need 123 credits, and I'd be delighted to sit down and compare my IQ to yours if you'd like, Frank.
On the other hand, the COVID pandemic introduced the term essential worker into our vocabulary. we discovered that the people who keep our society running are not the wealthy and educated, but those who work in grocery stores, make deliveries, and grow and process our food. It turns out that a society where 66% of people don't have college degrees relies considerably on people who don't have college degrees. Surprise, surprise. As MLK said, all labor has dignity. Doctors and nurses are obviously an important part of healthcare, but a healthy community is one that doesn't regularly get sick in the first place. People who keep our communities clean, people who maintain the safety of our food and water, and the people who manufacture and transport our medicines are all necessary parts of a healthy community. Likewise, people who drive buses and construct, clean, and repair our schools are as vital to the education system as teachers. We take a big risk denigrating and ranking workers within these systems. I prefer to do work that I feel is important, work that is making a valuable contribution, and not just according to myself, but according to others in my society. I doubt I'm alone in wanting recognition that my existence and my contributions have value. Ranking people doesn't encourage us to stand together, but to fight and compete. Inequality encourages us to scrutinize and moralize all the ways we are different in order to push our way to the top, instead of recognizing our common desires, goals, and hopes. Inequality means competition and undermines cooperation. So I don't like inequality, and I like diversity. I don't think this is contradictory. Actually, I believe inequality encourages conformity and discourages diversity. Let me explain. In an unequal society, the risks are big. Sometimes a risk will make you fabulously wealthy and powerful. But if your risk doesn't pan out, you could lose everything. You could subject yourself to humiliation, you're unable to care for your family, and you have little to no power. Psychological and economic research shows that people are generally risk-averse, meaning they would rather choose a surefire method that will guarantee they'll be okay, rather than a risky method that may benefit them greatly. Someone flips a coin and says, heads, you win $500, tails, you lose $300. I think most people would not take that bet, even though that expected outcome is $100. Honestly, I think that's pretty wise. Since the risks are higher in an unequal society, it makes sense that people choose tried and true methods. People generally are going to make decisions that they see working out for others. Here's an example from basketball. Steph Curry is an NBA player known for his ability to make three-point shots. When Curry joined the NBA, three-point shots happened, but they weren't super common. Most teams tried to get as close to the basket as possible and then make those safer two-pointers. But when Curry started winning games with his amazing accuracy and talent, the other players and teams took notice. Here's a quote from Shaun Powell at NBA.com.
The league-wide three-point growth and trend was apparent before Curry arrived, but by every metric and reasoning, he accelerated it. And when his success in shooting translated into championships, the influence caught hold, not only in the NBA, but trickled down to biddy ball, where kids dreamed of being the next Steph. Those who harbor futures in the NBA believe, with some justification, that they must shoot threes to even have a chance.
At first, this story seems to undermine my point. Curry started taking riskier three-point shots because he wanted to win. The fact that there are winners and losers encouraged Curry to try something different, and now he's going down in history as someone who revolutionized basketball. And that's awesome for him. He is truly a talented and skilled player. But focusing only on Steph Curry ignores the bigger picture. Curry took a risk and changed the game, and now every player and team has to meet that new standard that he has set. Before he came onto the scene, Curry was different, and everyone was conforming to the old way of doing things. Now they had to conform to the new way in order to keep up. I don't mind sports having winners and losers. The point of sports is entertainment, because sometimes competition can be fun. But notice how inequality encourages conformity. Clearly, some individuals take big risks, and it pays off, and they reap those rewards for centuries. But if we want people generally to try new things, to be different, to think differently, to value difference, we should not make being different extremely risky. People conform because it is a huge risk not to conform. You can quit your job at the office and spend your time trying out an idea for a silent leaf blower, but what if it doesn't work out? It is easier and maybe even more responsible to keep your day job and forget about your dreams of the quiet fall season. Conforming might not slingshot you to the top, but it is a good way to ensure you don't fall to the bottom. While a few brave, maybe irresponsible individuals might take risks, most of us are worried about how those risks will hurt us and our families. People with disabilities know this problem intimately. Businesses are so focused on efficiency and so worried about not falling behind that they always find ways to ensure that they don't have to hire people with disabilities. Accommodations can cost time and money, and businesses try to get ahead by cutting every expense possible. Even if that means ableism, they're going to find a way. If you're neurodivergent, you'll quickly discover that despite the propaganda, our unequal society is not kind to people who think and act differently. If you're blind or deaf, you know that different ways of perceiving the world aren't always valued. If we want society where people try new things, they live diverse ways of life, and they act as their unique selves, then we need a society that guarantees people won't be harmed, humiliated, or helpless when they don't conform. We should say, if you are or you want to be different, we'll support you. We need a society where imagination and creativity take priority over sleepless grinding. Ironically, inequality discourages us from exploring our differences. It makes differences a way to rank ourselves against each other, not an appreciation of how diversity sparks innovative solutions and new ways of life. Now that we've interrogated problems with inequality, what does an alternative society look like? Surprisingly, we can get some help from an unlikely source, James Truslow Adams, the guy who came up with the American Dream. Sandel has an interesting observation about Adams' description of the American Dream. Adams describes the Library of Congress as
perfect working out in a concrete example of the American Dream, the means provided by the accumulated resources of the people themselves, and a public intellect enough to use them.
If we think that Adams' American Dream is just when individuals rise to be wealthy rulers because of their hard work and talent, then a library is kind of a strange place to go. A library is a place of equality, not meritocracy. Adams was amazed not only that the Library of Congress was open to everyone, but that everyone was intelligent enough to take advantage of it. In 1931, S.R. Ranganathan wrote a book called The 5 Laws of Library Science. The 5 laws he proposes are: 1. Books are for use. 2. Every reader has their book. 3. Every book has its reader. 4. Save the time of the reader. And 5. The library is a growing organism. In these laws, we can see a vision of not only a great library system, but of a great society. Books are for use. By this, Ranganathan meant that the point of a library is for people to read the books. We shouldn't simply be accumulating and preserving this for the sake of accumulating and preserving them. All things should be for use. We need to stop producing things solely for the purpose of money. Food shouldn't be grown just to be thrown away, especially when people are starving. Housing shouldn't be built just so people can make money from renting it, especially when people are houseless. New medicine shouldn't be researched just to make pharmaceutical companies money, especially when people are dying of preventable diseases. Let's take the forces of production in society and focus them on producing goods that people need and that people are going to use. The second and third laws are: every reader has their book and every book has its reader. By this, Ranganathan meant that books should be for everyone, not just the educated few. Every person should be open to explore their interests. Everyone has a right to education. In addition, libraries should be open access so that readers are fully able to discover new books. What if we applied this thinking to the whole of society? Every person should be able to pursue their interests, to self-actualize, to discover new things without worrying about their uniqueness will mean that they won't be able to survive. We should also recognize that every person has a place in our world. All people can make valuable contributions, and nobody should be discarded or thrown into a cage. As Ranganathan says, the second law has no exception. It cannot rest until we arrange for the supply to everyone, normal or abnormal, his or her book. And I'll let you think of ways to apply the fourth and fifth laws to broader society outside of just the library system. Ranganathan's 5 Laws of Library Science is a very interesting book. It has philosophical discussions, historical analysis, charts and graphs, and even little skits where people have conversations with the laws themselves. I love the 5 Laws of Library Science, not because I work at a library on weekends, but because they demonstrate the equality that I'm looking for. The equality I want is not equality of outcome, whatever that means. Instead, it's an equality that undermines the harmful effects of inequality. Let's review the problems with inequality and identify that kind of equality that would address those problems. First, inequality encourages arrogance among the elite. I want equality of power and decision-making. This means implementing democracy wherever decisions are made, and eliminating unequal power distributions in the economy, government, and schools. Second, inequality destroys the learning process and harms students. I want real equality of access and opportunity. Students should be allowed free time to explore and learn on their own. They shouldn't be forced to constantly push in order to get ahead of their peers, which means we need to meet students where they are, not force them to fit in. Third, inequality breaks solidarity between people. I want equality of status and dignity. This means we must not see people as expendable or as a waste of space. We must see people as our equals, no matter their ability or disability. Every person has something to contribute. Fourth, inequality encourages conformity. I want equality of circumstance, an equality that says, I have your back, even if you want to try something different or new. An equality that ensures everyone can live decent lives and has the resources necessary to self-actualize. These ideas aren't new. In fact, we can summarize it in a principle I'm sure you've heard of. From each according to their ability, to each according to their need.